Good evening, everyone. My name is Alexei Belov. I'm the project manager for the proposed 608-793 Hubbardston Highway reconstruction of Route 68, Main Street, from 1,000 feet north of William Street Road to Elm Street project, which will be presented tonight. I work in the roadway project management section at the Massachusetts Department of Transportation's Highway Division, headquarters in Boston. Once the hearing is completed this evening, the attendance sheet will become a part of public record. So if you would like your attendance at this hearing to be part of the public record, please sign in on the sign-in sheet located over there on a small table by the door. Handouts containing details regarding this project are next to the sign-in sheet also. Now I would like to introduce the members of the hearing panel. Jeff Goyne from MassDOT District 3 office, Shirley Shiver from the MassDOT Right-of-Way Bureau, Jonathan Rockwell and Jonathan Shikes from the Engineering Corporation, the town design consultant for this project. Our transcriptionist, Walter Montani of Arlington Typing and Mailing in Arlington, Massachusetts, will be making a verbatim transcript of tonight's hearing for the public record as required by law. In the handout, the notice of hearing is included on the page 2. This notice appeared in Bar Gazette and the Garden News on February 20th, 2020 and February 27th, 2020. A copy of this notice will be attached in the final hearing transcript. Page 4 of the handout explains the purpose of the hearing, which gives us an opportunity to make a formal presentation of the proposed project and at the same time allows us to record your input regarding this project. The project we will be representing includes roadway reclamation, sidewalk construction and reconstruction, replacing a flashing beacon, minor drainage improvement, and other related work. Bicycle accommodations consisting of a 10 feet wide shared use path on the south side and 5 feet wide bike lane on the north side will be provided in accordance with applicable design guides. We're currently in the design stage, which means that project details may change prior to advertising. We estimate the total of the project will cost $4.9 million, which will come from federal aid funding, with the Federal Highway Administration funding 80% of the total construction cost. MassDOT will fund the remaining 20%. This project must be programmed in the statewide transportation improvement program in the appropriate federal fiscal year in order for MassDOT to solicit bids for eventual construction. The total estimated cost for the project does not include any right-of-way acquisition costs. The design is expected to be completed in the winter of 2023, and construction is expected to be completed within 15 months. As you may be aware, the reason for the project is poor condition of pavement, of the pavement structure, and missing or substandard pedestrian and bike accommodation, which impacts safety of traveling public and abutters. In a few minutes, Jonathan Rockwell of the engineering company is going to tell you about this project and how it will improve infrastructure and reduce impact stated earlier. But first, I would like to ask Shirley Shiver to explain the right-of-way procedure.
Thank you, Alexei. Good evening, everyone. When the Commonwealth, acting through its Massachusetts Department of Transportation Highway Division, indicated it would accept this $4 million project for funding, your municipality accepted certain responsibilities. One of those responsibilities is acquiring all the necessary rights in private and public lands for the design, construction, and implementation of this project. My function is to review and recommend procedures that your municipality will use in acquiring these rights. The procedures must comply with both federal and state regulations. The current design plan indicates that there are 6 permanent easements and approximately 55 temporary easements required. The property owners impacted by this project will be contacted by your municipal officials. They will present the proposed impacts to each owner and discuss the methods with which they may acquire the needed rights for the project. Frequently, municipalities will appeal for donations to minimize the acquisition costs for the community. However, donations are not required, and property owners are entitled to an appraisal, review appraisal, and just compensation. Right-of-way documents will be provided to each owner to help them understand the acquisition process and how the project affects their property. Affected property owners' rights are protected under Massachusetts general laws, primarily Chapter 79, and because this project is receiving federal funds, property owners' rights are further defined under Title III of the Real Property Acts of 1970 as amended. I will be happy to answer any general questions concerning right-of-way activities during this open forum, and I will be available after the hearing for any specific questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. Now Jonathan Rockwell will describe the town's project in detail for you. Please keep in mind that the project we are presenting to you tonight is still in the design stage. Once Jonathan is done telling you about the design, I'll explain the hearing procedure and then open up the hearing to your questions and comments, which we will take into consideration when completing the project's design. Please hold your questions until after the presentation.
Thanks, Alexei. Appreciate you all coming tonight. My name's John Rockwell with TEC. We're the town's design consultant for the project. The town's a project proponent, as Alexei may have mentioned, and as Pam mentioned, they're also responsible for acquiring easements in conjunction with the project. We're their design consultant, as I mentioned. DOT on this project is responsible for administering the design process, but they'll also be providing a full-time resident engineer service during construction of the project to oversee construction as it goes along. And then Federal Highway Administration, as they're investing 80% of the funds for construction of the project, is also responsible for oversight of the project. The project area and the project limits extend from Curtis Recreational Field in the north down to the intersection of Elm Street and Brigham Street to the south. It's about a 4,000-foot segment of Gardner Road and Main Street, which is Route 68. Just give you a little bit of background on the project history and some of the public outreach that's occurred to date. In 2017, January 2017, the project need was established when the town requested that the project be considered by MassDOT for future funding. And in March 2017, the project was approved by the MassDOT Project Review Committee to be eligible to receive that federal and state funding and move forward as a state TIP project, Transportation Improvement Program project. June 2017, we held a public informational meeting with the municipality and the town center committee. At that point, we were reviewing alternatives for the project, getting some initial feedback, learning what the town's goals were for the project as we began to develop that initial design. In January 2018, we had, at that point, had developed 25% design that we're ready to move forward and held a public informational meeting at that point. It's important to note, well, not necessarily that important, but it's just of note is that at that stage, the project limits actually extended from Williamsville Road to Brigham and Elm Street. And then after that initial 25% design submittal of that segment of the project, discussions with DOT and the town led to an understanding that there was a strong desire to extend the project up to the Curtis Recreational Field, provide some continuity of connectivity between the town center and the rec field. So in January or September of 2018, we submitted 25% design for that extension of the project from Williamsville Road up to the Curtis Rec Fields. So some of the existing issues along the corridor that are really driving the need for the project. The entire stretch really has a lack of adequate pedestrian accommodations all the way from Curtis Rec Field down to the town center where the school, town offices, library, and such are. There's a lack of designated bike lanes along the corridor. And then the majority of the corridor really is a relatively wide pavement section today. It's up to almost 40 feet wide in some areas, 36 to 40 on average. And that wide pavement section really encourages high speeds. The speed limit through the limits of the project really is about 35 miles an hour, but speeds generally or typically can reach well over 40. There's a poor pavement structure that exists out there today, significant cracking, rutting, a fair amount of utility patches. The intersection of Williamsville Road, you'll note, comes in at a severe skew here. And it's also a very wide intersection. That has a couple of kind of safety issues related to it. One is that it makes it very difficult for vehicles approaching on Williamsville Road to see to their left for oncoming traffic to make that decision to turn out onto Gardner Road. And another is any potential pedestrians that are traversing the road on this side have a very wide crossing across the intersection of Williamsville, and they're exposed for a significant amount of time. And this radius here is so flat and wide that vehicles are making that turn very quickly, often not stopping completely before pulling out onto Gardner. Heading further south, in this area there actually are some existing sidewalks, albeit narrow and pretty poor condition. And you'll note that there are 4 what we call mid-block crossings of Main Street in this area. And they're relatively closely spaced, particularly these near the post office and the school. And crosswalks today are uncontrolled, meaning in a couple of cases there are warning signs, but that's really it. There's no active or passive control device or warning devices. And at those existing pedestrian crossings, there's no ADA compliant curb ramps. As I mentioned earlier with the north segment, this segment also has a lack of designated bicycle lanes. And then I did allude already to the narrow sidewalk, which is in poor condition through the town center segment of the project. Up near the town offices, many vehicles park up in this area for school activities, town events. The parking lane here is really ill-defined. It creates a fair amount of friction between vehicles on Main Street and those that are pulling into and out of parking spaces. Just a couple of images here of that narrow sidewalk in pretty rough shape that we'd be looking to improve. You see a couple of pedestrian crossings here, but there's a curb and really a barrier to accessible pedestrian movements along this sidewalk network, the limited sidewalk network that's there today. A couple of images of the poor pavement that I noted as well. Some of the project goals that we developed in conjunction with the town and the town center committee through the early development stages were to create a more accessible town center and provide that connectivity from the school in particular, the town offices, that town center segment, all the way up to the Curtis Rec Field. Looking to provide safe and comfortable bicycle accommodations, improve pedestrian crossing safety and accessibility. Look for opportunities to improve intersection geometry and sightlines, both at Williamsville, also at High Street, and coming out of Brigham. And then, obviously, the pavement is in such poor condition, we want to use this project as the opportunity to rehab that existing pavement structure, improve the longevity of it for a long time to come. So just kind of a high-level walk through the proposed improvements. I should note we do have more detailed design plans here. This is more of an illustrative rendering of what the improvements will look like. If you have any questions afterward, we can kind of point to the specific locations on the more detailed plans and answer any more specific questions when we conclude the presentation. So up at the Curtis Rec Fields, on this segment of Main Street, actually it's Gardner Road up in this area, we'll be creating a consistent cross-section, installing a vertical granite curb on both sides of the roadway. Along the Curtis Rec Field itself, we'll be installing 5-foot sidewalks or 5.5-foot sidewalks, including the curb width, along the frontage of the Curtis Rec Field. At the termination of that sidewalk, there'll be a crosswalk to allow pedestrians from the field to get across to the sidewalk on the south side or the west side. And at that crossing, we're proposing what we refer to as RRFBs. Those are a warning device. They come in conjunction with a pedestrian crossing warning sign, and they're push-button actuated flashing beacons. You've probably seen them in some locations. They're becoming much more common now. really a good tool to improve the visibility and recognition of pedestrians that are looking to cross the roadway at what is generally an unexpected location, which is known as like a mid-block crossing. It's not at a defined intersection per se. In this segment, the bicycle accommodations will consist of a bike lane, a 5-foot bike lane on both sides of the roadway. As we head south at the edge of the rec field, this is where we begin a shared use path. That's where bicycles and pedestrians can use that same space at sidewalk level off the roadway. It's a much more comfortable and accessible means for people who, like young children for example, who are less comfortable riding a bike on the roadway in these on-road bike lanes. They're able to get away from the traffic. It's a buffered shared use path, so it'll be typically a 5-foot grass buffer, and the path itself is typically 10 feet wide. So that path begins at Curtis Recreational Field, comes down to this point, crosses over, and then continues along the west side of the roadway all the way down to Town Center. Where we pick up the beginning of the shared use path, on the northbound side of the roadway, the bicycle lane continues on that side. And the purpose of that is bicyclists who may be coming from Worcester Road down past south of Town Center, experienced bicyclists typically don't prefer to ride on a shared use path where it's mixed between pedestrians and bicyclists. They're more comfortable riding adjacent to traffic. But those less experienced bicyclists are likely to utilize the pedestrian crossings and get across to the shared use path on the opposite side. So the bike lane continues along the east side here with the shared use path. And then on this side of the roadway, the bicycle lane terminates at this pedestrian and bicycle crossing. And from this point south, on this side of the road, there'll be a 4-foot shoulder. Heading further south towards Williamsville, we're proposing some intersection improvements, geometric improvements to the intersection of Williamsville, where we'll bring Williamsville to more of a right angle intersection. So improving that angle of approach allows drivers on Williamsville to more easily see over their left shoulder to oncoming traffic. And then this wide radius today will be brought in a significant amount to reduce the distance of this pedestrian crossing and also reduce the speed of turning vehicles, making that right turn onto Main Street. So the shared use path continues along this side of the roadway for the remainder of the project limit. And on this side of the roadway, we have that continuous sidewalk for pedestrian accommodations, which up to Williamsville is a 5.5-foot sidewalk. But then south of Williamsville, the town requested that in that town center section where there's expected to be more pedestrian activity, that we widen the sidewalk a little bit. So that sidewalk will be 7 feet through the town center portion. At High Street, a couple of elements here to point out. We're slightly realigning the High Street approach similarly with a better right angle approach. And then also using the wide intersection here where you have less larger vehicles on High Street than you would on Williamsville. We're able to introduce a pedestrian refuge island midway there to make that a safer crossing. Pedestrians can cross part way, look for oncoming traffic, and then cross the remainder of the way. And also there's a little additional real estate here adjacent to the park that we're able to create a little bit of a small parking area for vehicles that kind of just park in that gravel area, partway in the road sometimes, partway off the road. Provide a little bit of a safer and more accommodation for parking during town events that may occur at the park there. And again, given the pedestrian activity that's expected to occur in this area, this is one area where there's an existing crosswalk. We're upgrading it for more of a high visibility crossing, again with those rectangular rapid flashing beacons and higher visibility crosswalk markings. And then similarly with the existing crosswalk at Mike's, we're also proposing to upgrade that with those rectangular rapid flashing beacons. There's expected to be a fair amount of pedestrian traffic continuing in that area to access the store there. In the northern segment, north of Williamsville, the pavement treatment there will be a resurfacing overlay, sort of mill down the existing pavement to a deep level and then resurface it with 2 layers of pavement. South of Williamsville, the pavement's in a little bit worse condition. The existing pavement section isn't as robust. So in this area, we're proposing a full depth pavement reconstruction. And then heading south toward the intersection with Elm Street. In this area, we'll be upgrading the school zone beacons for the center school. Continuing that bike lane along the north side of the roadway, continuing the shared use path, the buffered shared use path along the west side. And then as you approach the town offices, we create a parking lane along this side of the roadway. So it's more of a formalized parking lane than what exists today. It begins as a 7 foot, which is like the minimum parking lane width that you would allow, and then as it increases to 8 feet as you approach, again, that more high activity area near the town offices, near the school, where there's a lot more turnover in the parking use. And then we're proposing, again, RRFBs, those warning beacons at the school crossing, and we're proposing to eliminate the existing crossing at the post office. Those two crossings are very close together today. I understand there's demand at both crossings. However, given the proximity, our recommendation is to reduce those down to one crossing with upgraded visibility and warning devices. And as we approach Elm Street, we begin at this crosswalk. We begin to restrict the parking from that crosswalk to Elm Street. What that does is it allows, today, coming out of Elm Street, this restricted visibility when cars park along this shoulder all the way up to Elm Street. So we're restricting parking within that segment so that vehicles can more easily see oncoming traffic as they turn out of Elm Street. And then one other note just on sight distance as you approach on Brigham Street as well. We're proposing to cut back this hill a little bit there, put in a small retaining wall to improve the sight distance looking from Brigham Street to the south. Again, just trying to upgrade that pedestrian safety. And the sidewalk, the shared use path terminates at Elm Street, transitions to a sidewalk here, which will connect to the recently constructed sidewalk on Elm Street, which was done as part of the Complete Streets program, I think 2 seasons ago now. It's just a rendering looking north in the vicinity of the school crosswalk today, and then a rendering of what it will look like, approximately what it will look like in the future, with the shared use path on the left side. See that restricted parking up to this crosswalk, and then the parking lane picks up heading to the north. And then this is that continuous bike lane on the opposite side of the roadway. So just to recap the project scope, the corridor today has a lack of bicycle accommodation, or pedestrian accommodation, excuse me. And we'll be accommodating pedestrians with a 10-foot shared use path on one side, and the sidewalk varying from 5.5 to 7 feet on the opposite side. Introducing ADA compliant ramps at all the pedestrian crossings, and then introducing those warning devices for the crossings as well. And then the lack of pedestrian accommodations, or bicycle accommodations, excuse me, we're addressing with the shared use path, and then the bike lanes. The intersection geometry and issues with sightlines that exist today, we're addressing by realigning both the Williamsville Road and High Street approaches, reducing crosswalk lengths where it's feasible, and restricting that parking in that area just north of Elm Street. And then the high speeds and the generally caused by wide pavement, we're reducing the cross section consistently through the corridor to a consistent cross section. And then we're addressing the failing pavement conditions, as I mentioned, by resurfacing the northern portion and full depth reconstruction in the southern portion. So as construction proceeds, many abutters obviously are concerned about how traffic will be affected. We don't typically obviously we can't dictate to a contractor what their means and methods are, but generally the traffic will be accommodated utilizing police details during construction, shifting lanes to allow utilization of that existing wide pavement while the opposite side is reconstructed, utilizing the parking lane in some instances for short periods, as well as the shoulders. There may be some lane closures during off-peak periods where police officers will control alternating traffic. Pedestrians in that town center portion where there is existing sidewalk today will need to be detoured to the opposite side of the street for certain periods in order to construct the new shared use path and sidewalk. But the contractor will be required at all times to maintain access to residences and businesses. So looking at the project schedule, as I mentioned, there were 2 separate 25% design submittals back in 2018. Tonight we're at the design public hearing. We're prepared to advance to the 75% design level, which is the next step in the process, MassDOT's process, in the next month or so. And that will allow us, presuming everything stays on schedule, to advance to the 100% design submittal early this fall. There are a few environmental permitting steps that must be gone through with this project as it is federally funded. The environmental notification form is required through the MEPA office, the Mass Environmental Policy Act office, and that's required due to the removal of a certain number of public shade trees that are required in conjunction with the project. That's triggered when any more than 5 public shade trees are required to be removed. And then the NEPA is the National Environmental Policy Act. That's a categorical exclusion form that must be submitted. And then Section 106, as we're within a historic district, that'll be evaluated for any potential impacts to historic properties along the corridor. And our hope and our anticipation is that there'll be a de minimis finding of impact. We expect that the only impacts that would occur would be temporary impacts for minor grading behind the sidewalk to these properties. And we're hopeful that Mass Historic and MassDOT will determine that it is not an adverse impact to those properties. So the next step that the project's going to go through, again, it's the 75% design submittal, incorporating any feedback that we hear from the public this evening, to the extent that we can. Going through the environmental permitting step. And then the next step, coordinating with MassDOT and the Montechusett Planning Organization. There may be an opportunity to advance the project to an earlier fiscal year. Hopefully that may happen, but if not, it'll be programmed in the federal fiscal year 2023 as currently programmed. And then the next step would be the municipality beginning to outreach to abutters of the project to discuss those temporary impacts that I mentioned and those handful of permanent easements that may be required for utility pole relocations in this case. And then we'll complete the final PS&E submittal and advance to construction. And with that, I'll hand it back to Alexi.
Thank you, John. Excellent presentation. Before I open the hearing to questions and comments, I would like to explain the hearing procedure. First, as stated previously, the purpose of this hearing is to solicit your input regarding this project. As the plans are not yet complete, we may not be able to answer all your questions or respond to all your comments at this time. Next, we ask that everyone who wishes to have his or her comments entered into official hearing transcript, please stand up, identify yourself by name and affiliation, whether you are an abutter, local official, or concerned citizen, and spell your last name. This is necessary in order for us to obtain a full verbatim transcript as required by law. Also, the last sheet on the handout is a mail-in sheet. If you have any questions or comments which you would like to submit in writing, please use this sheet for that purpose. You may leave this sheet with me tonight, or you may mail it to the department within the next 10 days from this date, and it will become part of the official record. Finally, it is a normal procedure to ask elected officials to offer their comments first. Are there any federal, state, or local officials who would like to speak at this time? Please.
Just stand up and state who I am.
Yes, please.
Can I stand over here for a second?
No, stand where you are.
I'm going to stand right here. Dan Galanti, I'm chair of the select board as well as chair of the town center committee.
Would you spell your last name?
Yeah,
please?
Galanti, G-A-L-A-N as in Nancy, T-E.
Thank you.
Okay. Just a couple quick things. So first, we saw some of the timeline up there that Jonathan put up there. The Town Center Committee, our first meeting was September of 2015, so we're approaching 5 years on this committee, sort of brainstorming on where to start, which we had no idea, and we're just really happy to see it moving along in this process, so I wanted to sort of lead with that. The project overall is going to improve the entire Route 68 corridor for Hubbardston. As many of us know, the southern portion of Route 68 was done last year, and next year the northern portion of it is scheduled to be done as well. And some of the considerations that were made between all parties to extend the town center project were to be able to fit in the northern portion of the Route 68 project. So this is really a culmination of many years of sort of the Mass DOT helping the town of Hubbardston to join the entire trunk corridor for Hubbardston into just a brand new sort of wonderful conduit for our town. So we very much appreciate that as well. And just a couple other things. There have been lots of discussions about what people are supposed to do if they have questions, and some of the people are probably here tonight, but I hope that we can get some information as well, because people have busy lives, and so if somebody could just let us know later on what mechanism is in place for those who watch this, who hear about it from friends, who whatever else, can provide some questions to be able to make sure that people are worried they're going to miss out maybe, on their opportunity. And it sort of feels like the way it's presented at the beginning of this meeting, that this is the opportunity. And I know it's probably not the only one, but it feels that a little bit if you're just sort of sitting there waiting. So that's something that we'd just like to see as well. But we're just happy to see all the parties together here and really excited about the project. So that was it. Thank you.
Thank you. This hearing now is open to the public, and we welcome your questions and comments. Anybody?
Go ahead, Peter.
All right.
That's for whoever.
My name is
Oh,
Diane Moretti. I live in town, not associated with any committee.
Please spell your last name.
Moretti.
Thank you.
And my only comment, well, congratulations to everyone who spent 5 years working on this, because it's a thankless job, and it's quite impressive the way it looks like the work that you've done. My only comment is the position of the one crosswalk where you've eliminated one. It seems like you ought to split the difference, because from my perspective, if I'm going over to the post office, I've usually parked in this lot for this building, and the human nature being what it is, you're not going to go out of your way to use a crosswalk unless it's not that far. So if it just was moved slightly so that it terminates on the far side of 68, on the other side of the church's driveway, that would sort of be in the middle and might accommodate people from the town offices, the police station, the library, as well as the school kids. And thank you again for all the hard work. It's amazing.
Thank you. Please.
I'm Peter Jeffs. I live at 11 Main Street. I have 154 amount of frontage on Main Street.
Spell your last name, Peter. Spell your last name, please.
J-E-F as in Tom, T as in Tom, S as in Sam, F as in Frank.
Thank you.
I certainly attended the meeting with Jonathan, the informational meeting on in 2017. We had quite a bit of discussion back and forth. I still don't hear any. Again, my main thing was, Jonathan, is that I really appreciate the work you do, but there's nothing about the people who live here. You talk about the traffic, you talk about the pedestrians, but you don't talk about the people whose frontage is on Main Street and what it impacts with my sidewalk in front of my house. And when you spoke, when I heard you before, you said, oh, people have this ownership about the median. And I was like, well, yeah, I did up until then, and then you proposed this project. And it's like, yeah, that's right. I tried my best to mow that grass and keep it nice. And I know you're talking about abolishing it, and that's fine. Now, let me get away from my sort of advent. The main thing that I want to say tonight is that the Worcester County Highway Department in the 1930s placed a bronze marker on the sidewalk in front of 15 Main Street, which is the house which is next to me. And there's been no mention of that whatsoever in terms of preserving that marker, which shows where the line is, where the county highway determined was the end of the abutters and the beginning of the street. And I really think if we're going to do this, that at the very least for historical purposes, we need to maintain that monument. That was never mentioned, and your highway department, your people came out, and I never heard anything back about any of that. One of the things that you haven't spoke about is that you're going to cause my mailbox in front of my house to go across the street to the south side. I'm 70 years old today. What's going to happen in 10 years in terms of me crossing the street, and all of the people here, you don't live in town, Dan knows. Route 68, Main Street, has 18-wheelers running up and down it every day. It's hazardous to cross. There are times when I'm in my front yard where I can't even speak to my brother-in-law because the noise is so loud. This is not like little something. I mean, you people think that maybe, I don't know how you think about Hubbardson. Maybe Hubbardson is rural in the rest of the area where some of these people live. But where I live, it's like living in Holden. The lady right here, who just spoke to the crosswalk, 100% with you. We don't need that crosswalk down by the school. We need it where it is. That's where we're used to it. That's where the town offices connect to the post office. That's really what we need. I'm very, very happy. Jonathan, let me say, I'm not adversarial. I'm very, very happy that after that informational meeting in 2017, that you listened and proposed to extend this project out to Curtis Field. That's wonderful. I think that's absolutely needed. I understand that some of the issues here about the bike lanes, which I think are just built into the law, are fine. But as I pointed out to Dan when we spoke at that time, if we needed bike lanes, the bike lanes need to be more towards Gardner and to the center, and from the center down to Rutland, because that's where the people, it starts. Here we're 35, and maybe you're more careful about bicyclists. But you get to those other parts, they're doing 50 miles an hour. We definitely need a bike lane down there, but I understand the law says that it's in the center, which is fine. And Dan, I don't know about this, and I'm just speculating, but I noticed that just in the last couple of years, they took 2 trees on the north side down by
Phil's house? Yep.
Phil's house, down. And I didn't see any public meeting about removing those, and I didn't see anything from the tree warden at that.
I have a lot of info on that, and I can talk to you about it
That's
later.
fine, that's fine. I'm just pointing, again, informational kind
Got
of
it.
stuff. All I'm saying is that I see trees being taken down. I know on the opposite side of the street, my side of the street, we have no trees in that area. If we're going to have this kind of proposal and we're going forward to this, trees make a big difference in slowing down the traffic. And you brought that point out. The more trees you have in an urban or even suburban area here, and I know this from my own experience in working in other towns and cities, is that trees help slow things down. So I guess that's basically it. I don't want to sound like ranting and raving. I'm just trying to give you the best input I can. I'm the only, as far as I know, I'm the town center, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you live down Gardner Road.
Yeah.
Down
Just a couple
Worcester
houses
Road.
down.
Yeah, right. But other than that, I'm the only person who actually lives in the neighborhood. So, think about us too. You're bringing, this is a very upper level thing about highways and all this other kind of stuff. But think about the people who live here. And I do the best that I can to maintain the tree that Barry Hydaloma planted in front of my house as part of the Conservation Commission in the 70s, and that's a beautiful tree. You can all look at the pine oak in front of my house, and I have 2 nice maples that I do my best to maintain, and that's the kind of thing I would like to see. I want the center of the town to be my neighborhood. I just don't want to see it as a pass-through. So thank you very much.
Alexi, you mind if I respond
Thank
to a
you.
couple of?
No, sure, go right
So,
ahead.
Sure.
no, with respect to trees, I think we can speak with DOT. There may be an opportunity to provide some replacement trees along the corridor. I know the MassDOT landscape section offered some comments on the 25% design that might be desirable to them as well. So we'll be looking for those opportunities to incorporate them at the 75% level.
And Jonathan, just another thought that occurred to me is
Yeah.
that you one of the things that you perhaps have not noticed, but because I live there every day, is that one of the problems that we have is coming up Brigham Street because of GPS, and we have large trucks coming from Canada and all sorts of other places that are using just GPS. We have 18-wheelers coming up Brigham Street and pulling on to 68, and it can become a major problem. Now, my understanding, and Dan, you probably know better than this, is that there's a restriction down by Evergreen, which requires them to go down Evergreen and then come up that way to get to 68. And I believe in years past, we had a sign down there that said there was a truck exclusion for 18-wheelers. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but certainly that's something to consider, is to restrict them to come across Evergreen and to come in through the Princeton Road, down by where the river is, rather than turning left into the center. I know that's really
that's
nitty-picky.
outside the scope of the
I
project.
know,
to
I
look
know.
at those
Well,
restrictions, yeah.
well, Dan, perhaps we can address that in town.
We can. One other just thing, if I could say something, is we're actually replacing the Evergreen Bridge soon too, so that won't actually be an option for at least the construction season. No, I'm just throwing that out there too as well. But
It wouldn't be?
it would not, just while the Evergreen Bridge gets reconstructed, that road's going to have restrictions.
Well, this has been
as well.
going on for.
No, I know. I agree with you.
Gentlemen,
Yeah.
if you both speak at once, I don't hear anything, so one at a time, please. Let's
This is only the only way we know how to talk.
I understand that, but it won't get in, if you want your comments in the transcript, I need to know who's saying what. So one at a time, please.
I was done.
And I'm done.
Thank you.
Also, with respect to trees, certain segments of the project were actually, the design of which were actually driven by the desire to preserve some of the mature trees that were out there, shifting the roadway and sidewalks to one side or the other in certain segments to try to preserve as many trees as we could. So certainly there was an effort during the design to respect those as true design constraints. Regarding the mailbox, I don't believe we're proposing to move mailboxes from one side to the other in any case. So
That caught my attention too. I don't think so, but I'll
Okay,
verify that.
when, I'm just remembering, again, it's been a couple of years, but that my understanding was that when we had that June 2017, they were talking about putting one on the other side of the street. And I'm fine. Listen, I'm happy that I can have my mailbox when I can go out and get to it
Yeah.
without having to cross the street.
So that's not in the proposal. at
Okay,
this
great,
point.
great, thank you.
And then with respect to that marker, we weren't aware of that, though. Actually, that's not completely true. I do remember now that you say it coming up at a prior meeting, but it wasn't something that was picked up on survey. So we'll certainly make a point to locate that and speak to Mass Historic or Mass DOT Historic Cultural Unit section regarding preserving that marker, or if necessary, to relocate it appropriately.
And just going forward, my only other concern here is it seems to me there's a lot of flashing lights being being distributed within, for me, relatively short distances. There's not that much foot traffic, and I just think that the light pollution in the center of town, and I'm not talking about I want to look at the stars. I'm talking about I want to sleep at night. Again, sorry Dan to put you on the mark here, but the DPW just installed more high-level lights in the parking lot between the library and the town offices, and I've already had my neighbors, namely Flo and who live next door to me, saying that it's hard for them to sleep at night. And personally, I see no reason why we have to illuminate the parking lot over there to that extent. To me, the more lighting you have, the more it encourages speed. And I know that may seem counterintuitive, and I'm not trying to cause traffic problems, but to light up that whole area, around the school, I just don't see the purpose of it when we don't have that much traffic. I mean, we have traffic during the day, but I know living there that after 6, 9 o'clock at night, it drops off to a trickle.
So on the beacons, I mean, if there's not a lot of pedestrian traffic, you'll never see those lights. They're only push button actuated, so it's only when someone chooses to cross and
Okay.
use them. And
Well-
if there's no vehicular traffic, most people won't bother pushing the button. They'll see there's no
Well,
traffic in this cross.
Given the number
So-
of people here in town, it sounds to me like it's like overkill. There's not gonna be that many people pushing buttons.
Right.
This isn't downtown Worcester.
My kids push every button around.
Well, yeah.
Folks, while we're paused for a moment here, especially folks in the back row, if you continue speaking, that's great, but I need you to stand, because if you're speaking through the man in front of you, it doesn't sound as clear up here for me. Thank you. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, Mike Foley, Pitcherville Road, neighbor, I guess,
Can you spell your
Citizen.
name, please?
F-O-L-E-Y.
Everyone spell your name, please.
Foley.
Thank you.
To the point around the crosswalk near the school, I cannot agree with you more. You're eliminating the parking here, and when you consider school dropping kids off and picking them up, parents today are parking here and they're parking over here, which is why that crosswalk has so much traffic.
Mhm.
When you've eliminated that, you've eliminated the need for that crosswalk to be there. Vast majority of day-to-day traffic is going to the post office from this parking lot.
Okay.
So pulling that down closer to the post office, maybe across from the library or something like that, I think would be much better. And will discourage people from attempting to park over there. Because they will. You'll see people driving their trucks right up on the median, so.
Okay. We'll certainly consider adjusting the location of that.
That's my input. Looks great otherwise.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Carol Pearsall, Pearsall, High Street resident. I live near the intersection of Route 68 Main Street and High Street, and you wouldn't believe the number of cars that don't realize that the telephone pole in the middle is a go around, no matter which way you go. They come from Gardner Road and they go to the left of the pole. They come up 68, they make a roundabout turn to go back the other way, and it's like, we're just waiting. So I hope the signage is a lot more visible with your whatever it is there
Saying High Street?
on High, than
Yeah.
it is now.
Yep. The utility pole that's in that island today will be removed,
Okay.
and the island there will have adequate signage to indicate that vehicles are
Keep
supposed to
right.
keep right around it.
Well, it already has a sign, but you have to be coming from the house across the High Street, across from High Street on 68, to actually see that sign.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody drives out of that house to go around that pole. They're coming up and down 68. So the sign is in the wrong place.
Okay. So yeah, it'll be signed and then adequate delineation of pavement
Okay.
markings approaching it to
Right.
divert around it.
Thank you.
Please.
Dan Galante, Galante. Couple questions. First is, you talked about the different types of pavement that are, or pavement treatments that are going in, and you talked about how within the main section of the north of Williamsville is less robust, which I assume you mean is from previous cores that were done.
Correct.
And so there's a two-part question. So that's the first one, is just if you could talk about what you found.
Yeah, so we performed pavement cores last fall along the corridor. And do you remember what the pavement section was that we found?
Depth-wise
Yeah.
stuff, or it varied for sure.
Yep.
It was the greatest right around Williamsville Road, and then it kind of tapered to 7 or 8 inches at each end, and then it got more as you got to Williamsville Road.
Yeah, so I think in the thinner areas, it was about 5 inches of pavement today. With the truck traffic and the volume of traffic, daily traffic that you expect along the roadway over the next 20 years, it warrants a more robust pavement section. And given the topography of the adjacent yards, we really didn't want to look at we looked at reclaim potentially, but that would require, in most cases, raising the profile of the roadway up a little bit, and we didn't want to do that for topography reasons.
Okay.
So the better option that we concluded was a full depth reconstruction in that southern portion. The northern portion had closer to 7 or 8 inches in much of it, and the existing roadway up in that area is actually super elevated, meaning it all pitches to one direction. So from a constructability standpoint, it made sense to retain that pitch how it does today, which is why we concluded the best option up there was just to resurface the roadway, and rather than just do it. Again, because of the condition of the pavement, the age of the pavement, we drew the conclusion that it made sense to do a deeper mill, so take away a little bit more of that pavement and then replace it with new pavement.
Comments we've heard through Town Center Committee and just the project over the last several years, there have been concerns of people, and I'm not going to be specific because I can't really remember, but about drainage considerations and introduction of new drainage onto properties that maybe didn't have them before, or can you just go into the considerations, how that process goes, and maybe specifically for our job as well?
Yep. So the existing drainage system will generally be maintained with some added inlets in order to reduce the potential for flow to build up in the gutter, because we're introducing vertical curb in some areas where there's not today, or it's pretty low today. So we'll be upgrading the system in that regard. On average throughout the corridor, well, it looks like we're adding a significant amount of hard surface with the shared use path and the sidewalk on the opposite side. Much of that is actually created by bringing the curb in toward the roadway a little more than it is today. So the increase in impervious area is actually pretty minimal percentage-wise across the entire corridor, so we don't expect a significant amount of additional runoff.
Okay, and my final question. So part of this project I talked about sort of in a sort of grandiose fashion of the trunk corridor, in addition to a lot of the things that the town are doing over the last few years in conjunction with the other Quabbin towns. There are 5 total Quabbin towns. Is we've got a shared economic development director, and we're really trying to pump up the region. And this sort of a thing is really important to us as far as making it more friendly towards maybe visitors. So the question that I'm getting at is we're obviously going to have an impacted area for a little while, and what we're trying to promote is businesses. So are there going to be plenty of considerations about businesses still open, signage and all that sort of stuff? Like how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, the MassDOT, as they administer the construction services full-time, the resident engineer is, one of his primary roles is as an interface between abutters and the contractor to ensure that the residences and businesses' needs are met and maintained during construction, to maintain open driveways. Oftentimes, if there's a specific need identified during construction for some of the businesses along here, they will authorize signs to be put together, open during construction and that type of thing, if a business owner identifies that as a specific need. It's not something we have in our design plans per se until that specific need is brought to our attention, but it can happen during construction easily. Yeah.
Please.
I'm Alicia Muck. It's M-U-C-K. I am also in the Town Center Committee with Dan and live adjacent to the project. So I just wanted to mention a couple things. So my neighbor who lives on the corner of Brigham and Route 68, one concern that he's brought that I just want to make sure it's hard because he evidently wasn't able to be here, is his desire is to have an aesthetically pleasing wall along where the hill is being cut back, versus like his concern is something like what was put up in front of the lawyer's office that looks more cinder blockish, and just a
Yep. No, I remember I had a conversation with him at the pre-25% public meeting.
Yeah.
He expressed that he was very supportive of the wall because we had options to either slope it back or put the wall, and discussed what we would be proposing would be a cemented stone masonry wall, so it'll look like a stone wall with grouted joints.
awesome. He'll be very happy to hear that as well. And I also wanted to just express a concern that is going to be brought up by other parents of small children, is the consideration that construction in front of the school, if possible, could be done at a time when school is not in session, simply because that is such a busy drop-off, because the drop-off does happen along Main Street, and that would be a considerable impact on parents and the safety of the kids, trying to get them in with road closures in front of the school during school season. I know We're not absolutely going to be able to control that, but if possible, it's just that concern citizen. And otherwise, oh, and I just wanted to say to make sure everyone's aware as well, there is, at least 4 members of the Town Center Committee who are Main Street residents, as well as myself, who's only a few houses away. And we've been working very closely with TEC in the design stages to make sure that we are thinking of the residents as well. So it's definitely good to hear your opinion, but also just to make sure that people are aware that we do have several citizens as well that are working closely that are also impacted by the construction.
Half of the Town Center Committee lives on Main Street.
But they're not here tonight.
No,
That is, unfortunately, we're not able to be here
there
today.
were 4 different excuses.
Anybody else?
I have one more, I'm sorry.
Please.
Thanks. Dan Galante, Galante. So you talked about, we talked about this as a Town Center Committee as well, and I just want to bring it up in here to discuss it a little bit. So there's the question of the buffer, of what to put in the buffer. And I think you mentioned grass buffer. And then, there's questions about, is the grass ever going to grow? Because it's right there where the snow's going to be and all that. Why a grass buffer?
It doesn't need to be grass. From a economical standpoint, grass is generally the easiest to, or the cheapest to install, the easiest to maintain in the future. Hard surface materials could be considered more expensive upon installation. Not 100% guarantee. Would have to discuss with MassDOT whether certain hardscape materials would be participating, or whether the town would have to contribute potentially to certain materials that they were considered. Like, brick is one option. Those type of pavers. It's typically a 5-foot buffer, which is adequate to maintain grass. Usually our minimum that we would say would be a 3-foot buffer. Anything less than that, it would turn into a dirt strip. 5 foot, we expect that it could be maintained as grass. So there are options, but
Thanks.
All right. Any other questions? Okay. If there is no other questions or comments, I'd like to remind you that the last page of the handout is the mail-in page. If you have any further questions or comments which you would like to submit, please use this piece of paper for that purpose. You can write your question on this side, fold it, and mail it, and it will find its way to
Actually,
MassDOT.
the sheet before that has if you look at the sheet before this envelope, is like the form that you could fill out and mail in.
Yep. You may leave it with me now, or you can mail it to the department within the next 10 days from this date, and it will become part of the official record. Before I close this hearing, I would like to say that we will be here as long as you are interested in looking at the plans, and we will try to respond to questions that affect each one of you personally. Thank you very much for attending this meeting, and thank you, town, for providing this facility. And I would like to declare this hearing closed at 8 o'clock.
And you're off.
All right.
You said it was your first one. Yes.
Hey, how you doing?
Shoulder.
That's why you don't.
Shoulder.